Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thanks for liking our video, for subscribing to us, and for clicking that bell icon to get reminders when our new episodes drop.
That's right. So each week, Pastor Todd and I will be talking about the upcoming lectionary reading from the Gospels for the upcoming weekend. And our hope during this time is to talk about those passages, those readings in the context of love and inclusion and societal justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just, our conversation will be just as in justice, but that also something that we say during this time in our dialogue back and forth would inspire you alongside with us to do more in our daily lives than just talking. So, Todd, what's
So,
our passage this week?
yeah, we continue in Matthew 13, this chapter full of parables, and today we're going to just look at a bunch of one or two liners that Jesus has got in Matthew 13, 31 to 33, and verses 44 to 52. So, yeah, a number of parables to unpack. And so let's get into it, Herb.
Yeah, so when I was writing my blog this week at Renewed Heart Ministries, usually I select some graphics and some images, and this week I had to do kind of like a collage of
Mm.
images because that's what this week's reading is. It's basically just it's kind of a potluck of parables all about the kingdom. And we've talked about that language of calling it a kingdom before.
Hmm.
You can call it beautiful community the way the king did. You can call it God's just future the way that others do today. You can whatever it is, it's about community. It's about a different way of doing life in the here and now that prioritizes those who are blessed in the Beatitudes and make sure that everyone's taken care of. So let's talk about that mustard seed first.
Okay.
One of the critiques is that mustard seeds don't grow up into trees. They grow
Mm.
into small little bushes, if that. So what on earth is Jesus talking about? And I submit that it's not a botanical lesson because it doesn't bear out. It's a political lesson.
Mm.
It's a metaphor. It's kind of an imagery that's being used. Got any thoughts on
So,
mustard, Todd?
well, I do like the idea of the kingdom being uh, less like a stately tree or something like that, and being more of a fast growing weed. Um,
Okay.
that that uh that that's an intriguing idea for me, to see the kingdom as slowly just not slowly but rapidly growing and spreading out and taking over. And I like that idea quite a bit.
Yeah, that's the way mustard, for those of you who aren't aware of this, that's the way mustard was considered back in that agricultural society. The mustard plant wasn't planted on purpose. It was a weed in a person's agricultural planting that they had to uproot, and they needed to do so quickly before it took over the entire plot. And that's kind of the way not kind of, that is the way that the elites, the power, the property, the powerful, that they viewed Jesus's teachings among the masses. The people were so enamored by Jesus's gospel of what human community could look like, um, especially the marginalized and those the disenfranchised. They were so enamored by Jesus's preaching that that the elites said, "Man, this is like a weed. If we don't nip it in the bud quickly, it's going to take over." So why the question always is asked, and why is it likened to a tree? Well, he's using the double metaphor here of a weed and the tree because that had some roots in the Jewish hope at that time and in the Hebrew scriptures. In Ezekiel 17:22 through 23, it says, "This is what the sovereign God says: I myself will take a shoot from the very top of the cedar and plant it. I will break off a tender sprig from its topmost shoots and planted on a high and lofty mountain, talking about Jerusalem. On the mountain heights of Israel, I will plant it, and it will produce branches. So it starts off small, then it produces branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will nest in it, and they will find shelter in the shade of its branches. So that's what he's saying. Even though this is considered to be a weed by those who have much to lose by the societal changes Jesus was calling for, even though it's called a noxious weed, it has the potential to tap into these hopes of the people that are rooted all the way back in Ezekiel. And Babylon too, in Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, his kingdom is likened to the tree where animals, feed off of it and find shelter. And so this is imagery of empire and kingdom. But again, Jesus's vision for human community was anything but traditional kingdom and empire. Matter of fact, in my blog this week, I know we're calling it a kingdom because the story does, but there's kind of this principle not kind of, there is this principle in the gospels where, like in Matthew 23, it says, don't call anyone father on earth. You have one father in heaven. Don't call anyone instructors. You have one instructor. You don't call anyone rabbi. You have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And again, there's an egalitarian critique that can be made toward all of this. But the point is, you have one of these already. Don't be that among themselves. So in them calling Jesus's new community a kingdom where Jesus was the king, I know that it has been historically very vulnerable to being co-opted by empire and kingdoms, and that's what we see happened. But the original intent seems to be, and John Dominic Crossan makes this argument too, that the original intent seems to be that by making Jesus king, none of the humans were to be king. We were to be more on the same level, more egalitarian as equals with each other. And so the original intent was to undo kingdom rather than the way it has been co-opted by and been complicit in kingdom. But anyway, that idea of the reason the mustard seed grows up into a tree isn't because that's the nature of mustard, because that's the Hebrew hope that Jesus or the gospel authors were referencing here.
Yeah, I love the double entendre of that, because it really, it and the whole idea of the mustard weed, represented the value that of the people, that how the upper class viewed the masses, the great unwashed, the great, the the riffraff, the trash to an extent. This just not seeing the value in those people, and yet Jesus saying, no, what you are going to create you are going to create something that, like the promise that God has promised to Israel in the past, it's just going to look different. It's just going to be something that's like you said, more egalitarian, and something that where the average person, where the commoner has a place of value, has a stake in the kingdom, and becomes part of that life-giving work that the kingdom brings. So I love the grandeur and the commonality both interacting together in a powerful way with that story.
I like how you referenced that it's not going to look like you expect. It's not going to be as expected. It's not going to be like David sitting on a throne again. Right. It's going to look more like community where people are committed to making sure no one has too much while others don't have enough, and that everybody's going to be taken care of. I love that.
And as you say, and we've said before, when you look at the early church in Acts, that's exactly what you see. You see this weed taking off and growing uh, in the midst of empire. It is not.
Hmm.
It is not a. It is not a kingdom that has replaced the empire yet, but it is a kingdom that is working its way and moving and maneuvering around and causing new ways of living amongst the people who are participating in it.
Yeah, that's a great segue into the next section here, where Jesus likens the kingdom not to just mustard, but also leaven. In the
Mm,
Passover tradition, leaven was a corrupting influence. They were told to get out, to remove all the
that's
leaven
right.
from their homes. It was a symbol of that which was corrupting or impure. And
Hmm.
certainly Jesus Jesus's teaching, once again for the elite in his society, was viewed as a corrupting influence on the masses.
Right.
You
Right.
know what I'm saying? It was the enemy. It was permeating, like you just said. It was, permeating in the existing dough and kind of
Hmm.
working its way through, and everything was bubbling inside. And I mean, that's why, I mean, again, in the book of oh, is it Luke or is it John, where it says that they would have arrested Jesus right then and there, but
Hmm.
they were afraid of the people. The
Right.
people were just resonating with what, the yeast was doing its thing in the dough of society. And
Yeah.
but again, it was yeast in their culture, so it was a corrupting, negative, bad thing that should be
Hmm.
dealt with, and dealt with speedily. and
Hmm.
and I love that. I mean, we live in the US today, but there was a time among monarchs where things like democracy, the
Right.
ideas like democracy, were considered uh, 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 a corrupting influence. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
Yep.
even the most non authoritarian democratic forms of like socialism on planet Earth today are viewed by lots of people here in America as corrupting influence.
Yep.
Um, last night, I'm part of a weekly Zoom group on Wednesday nights, and last night someone brought up anarchy. That anarchy
Hmm.
necessarily isn't chaos, and anarchy is just the opposite of hierarchy. It's another word for an egalitarian,
Hmm.
shared way of relating to one another, where power
Hmm.
and resources are shared, rather than hierarchy. That's anarchy. And again, that's hard because we've been programmed to
Right.
define anarchy not as that, but as some corrupting influence where everything's just chaos.
Yep.
And again, we see this principle over and over again. How many things today? We don't live in a culture where leaven is bad. I mean, we all eat anyway. Yes, we eat bread, but unless you're gluten intolerant. but
Right.
but but and even, there's leaven is used in everything today. Leaven is used in everything, and so we don't belong in a culture like that. But in Jesus's Jewish culture, to liken the kingdom to leaven would have been
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, they don't think this is a good thing, do they?
And this is just something that I think is so crucial to understand is the kingdom message will always be like yeast and leaven for in working in a society, because society, there is not a functioning society in our world that is not built on some sort of power structure that that includes some people and excludes others. So whether you're talking about a fascist state, or whether you're talking about even the best socialist states, you still have systems where there are people who are missing out and not fully embraced. Yeah, I mean, even in the socialist states, there is this pushback on, there's this nationalism pushback that is taking place in some of those places, and so there is always the risk in a society of bringing back this exclusionary, power mongering way of living. And so the kingdom of God is always going to be functioning as that yeast that says, no, 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 no. This is the kingdom means everyone has a seat at the table. Everyone
Mhm.
belongs. Everyone has a stake in what takes place here. Everyone has value, and it's going to constantly be doing that work. It's never going to be coming in and trouncing over everybody else. It's always going to be like you said, bubbling up to the surface and being that corrupting influence to whatever system is trying to dominate. Um, that
It sounds
that's
like
it's got
you've
to be
been
understood.
corrupted
If
too, Todd.
I've been corrupted, because what I know is I I'm viewed more as a weed and as corrupting yeast than I am as the good stuff. I'm not recognized as the good wheat or a beautiful tree. The way I'd go about things, I'm seen as the other. Um, but that's the way it works. It'll
Yeah,
never. The
right.
glorious kingdom of God is a weed and yeast. It's not the wheat and the tall, noble cypress tree. It is something much more insidious and rapidly spreading.
Yeah, yeah. And it reminds me too. What you just said reminds me too of the old adage in some sectors of Christianity, where well-meaning preachers will say very trite things like, "Well, if it's not good news, it's not the gospel," you know.
Mm,
And certainly, what Jesus was preaching was perceived as good news to those on the margins. When he said, "Blessed
right.
are the poor," that's good news to the poor. You know what I
That's
mean?
right. That's right.
But it wasn't, there are characters in the story for whom Jesus' preaching was still the gospel, but it wasn't
That's right.
perceived as good news. Herod did not perceive it as good news. Caiaphas did not perceive it as good news. Pilate didn't perceive it as good news. Those are the characters in the story that would have labeled Jesus' teaching as noxious, as as corrupting, like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, as that weed, that leaven that should be dealt with. It needed to be dealt with, or else it was going to, it was going to foment. Oh, there's a
Yeah.
great word. It was going to
Yeah.
foment in some kind of revolution among the
Mm,
people.
mm.
And I mean, that's what yeast does. It foments.
Right. Yeah,
I love
that is a good
that.
word.
I
Yeah.
love that.
All right, so then we keep going, and we got different kind of parable.
That's right. So next, his tack changes a little bit. He says, "Yes, I know you're viewing it," and he's talking about a certain sector of society. We typically universalize the gospel, but the gospel takes a different tack as it speaks to people in different social locations,
Mm,
right? And so he's speaking, saying, "Yes, the gospel is viewed by the elite as a weed. It's viewed as yeast." It says, but then he turns his tack and he starts talking to the elite, to those who, um, for some people, moving towards equality is a step up. For other people, looking at it from a certain angle, a step towards equality is a step down for
mm-hmm,
them. That it's going
mm-hmm.
to cost them something. They're going to lose something in moving towards a more egalitarian human community.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying to you, the kingdom is like treasure that's found in a field, and the person goes and sells everything they have to obtain it. That even
Mm,
though it costs them everything they presently have, what they're going to get in return is of inestimable worth by comparison. And we're talking about treasure hid in a field. We're talking about a pearl of great price. And the tie-in, the parallel is that this person who finds this thing sees it of such great value that they're willing to sell everything they have. And that's what Jesus continually told the wealthy in almost every version of the Jesus story we
mm-hmm,
have in our canon is
mm-hmm.
sell everything you have, give it to the poor, then you'll have treasure. Sell everything you have, give it away, then you'll have treasure. And this is that same thing to you who view this as a weed, to you who view this as leaven. The call is still out there. Sell everything you have, and you're going to find what you get in return as you share those resources, that wealth redistribution you're going to find that what you're creating is a community where everyone's taken care of, including yourself. And it's a much more beautiful way to be human. That's what Zacchaeus bought into. When Zacchaeus said, I'm going to make right up to 4 times everything I've
Right.
cheated. He's making reparations. Certainly that cost him something, but he was willing to sell everything he had to buy into Jesus's
Hmm.
teachings, Jesus's gospel of the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you brought out the how Jesus changes his tack so that he can reach more people. Takes me back to the parable of the sower, where the sower sows seed on all types of ground. He's not limited to just the ones who take it most rapidly and it takes off in their lives, but he even goes after others, and trying desperately to get to the merchants, trying to get to the political people, those who have means, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to get them to respond as well. I love it's an it's a it's a physical example of what he had just been teaching in the parable of the sower from what we read a couple weeks ago. Um,
It's
Go
pretty
ahead.
powerful when you compare it to Acts 2 and Acts 4. There's this parable of sell everything, or parable of the guy who sold everything he had to obtain the field or to obtain the
Hmm.
treasure or the pearl. And then you go to Acts 2 and it says they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had
Hmm.
need. And then Acts 4, there was no needy person among them, for from time to time those who owned land and houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. There
Yeah.
they were, selling everything they had in order to obtain the pearl of great price.
It's radical stuff. I mean,
It
that's
really is.
just
And no wonder it was looked at as a weed. Jesus is
right.
saying if you feel like you're a weed because you're buying into this, or you're looked at as corrupting because you're buying into this, you're in the right story.
Right. you and when you start being, and in other places Jesus talks about when you suffer persecution and name calling for my name's sake, that was going to happen when if you really bought into the teaching of the kingdom of God and sold your possessions and changed your social location in order to be part of what this movement was. You were going to bring the weird looks, the gossip, the name calling, that for you going into this crazy thing called the kingdom of God and this Jesus movement. And this is, I mean, this is just radical. This is not Christianity from the 1950s in America, where to be a good American was to be in church on Sunday. This is not
Right.
that message. It is not the respectable thing to do. This is people going on the streets. This is people selling their homes and putting up tents. This is people doing all sorts of radical changes, in order to be part of a community that had enough amongst the group.
That's right. In many sectors of Christianity today, Todd, we have a very domesticated, kind of housebroken, to use an analogy,
Mm.
Jesus. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Where it really doesn't change your life that much to become a Christian. I mean, you get a ticket that assures you post-mortem bliss when you die. But outside of that, it really doesn't change your life, except for what you said just now. You're going to church once a week. You have something else to add to your agenda. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? To your schedule.
Yeah.
We have a Christianity today where it will actually change your life more to become a vegan than it would to follow Jesus.
Mm. Mm.
And that should give us pause.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make following Jesus difficult, but I do want to be honest for where if we follow the Jesus of the story, how it will change the lives of the propertied, the privileged, and the powerful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So next we have this net that's thrown out and gets Oh, I mean, we talked about this last week. I despise this language. We have this net that's cast out, and there are good fish that are caught and bad fish that are caught.
Mm,
And then there's the great sorting at the end of the age where the good fish are gathered up and the bad fish are thrown away. And I don't know how much we want to talk about that again this week. But if you didn't listen to last week's episode, I at least want to encourage you guys to go back and listen to that conversation where we
yeah,
talk about this language, how it's used in the Gospels at times, and how historically it has not borne good fruit. We can
right.
just do better. We can do better.
Yeah. And whether, again, it's the Matthean community who throws that teaching in with the other teachings of Jesus, or whether it's Jesus himself having that eschatological bent where he, because we have the story of the wheat and the weeds that we looked at last week. We have the story of the sheep and the goats later on in Matthew. We have the parable of the 10 virgins, the five foolish and the five wise
Right.
virgins. You have so many of these eschatological teachings of Jesus where there's the ins and the outs. It's problematic when you have these other passages about the weeds. I mean, about with the parables that we're talking about today, and how the kingdom of God spreads rapidly among those who are looking for it, and the yeast that bubbles
I
up
thought
and
weeds
takes
were
over,
good.
and the weeds are good and the yeast is good and stuff like that. It's antiphonal in the way that Jesus sounds, and so it's hard to take that in when Jesus is clearly coming with a message to bring everyone along in the process. Even if he's attacking systems and structures, he's ultimately trying to redeem even the people who ran those systems and structures. Um, this sorting of the good and the bad at the end of time is just, it just rubs wrong with the other things that we're reading about Jesus and teachings
Yeah.
from Jesus.
And I know there's a lot of, I don't know how much into the weeds we want to get into with this. I know there are brilliant Jesus scholars out there that view Jesus as an apocalyptic. And I want to
Mm-hmm.
respect that. And what that means is that he actually taught what we're talking about this week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But where I'm at today, and I'm not saying I'll be here tomorrow, we're all growing, we're all learning more, but where I'm at today, I side more with those Jesus scholars like Marcus Borg and Crossan, who see John the Baptist as apocalyptic, and certainly many of the followers of Jesus after who came in through Paul were apocalyptic. But Jesus himself was not. And that when we see apocalypticism, like what we're talking about this week, when we see that, that's the interjection into the Jesus story of the community that wrote this story rather than the historical Jesus himself saying these things. That's why there's kind of a confusion, a lack of consistency in the gospels at times. It sounds like Jesus is saying opposite things. Well, it's because you had two worldviews competing with each other in the early Jesus community, and both of them wanted to put their views in the mouth of Jesus. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I just, again, historically, one of those views has produced bad fruit in Christianity, and the other one shows us a path towards following Jesus in a better way. So we have to decide which way we're going to go.
Right. Yeah, it's a choice of it, it 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 is simply that choice to live into the kingdom as now versus choosing to be passive in waiting for a kingdom to come. And for me, it makes total sense that whatever the kingdom to come is, the kingdom is now, and the kingdom is worth attempting to bring, is the kingdom is worth bringing to other people right now, and doing the work of sowing the seed and the work of sharing the good news and being the good news however we can do that economically and socially and religiously
Mm-hmm.
and politically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, when we say politically, we don't mean partisan.
Right.
We mean that everything is politics. Everything is about shared power and shared resources and how that's divided up. It's the polis, it's about people. And wherever people are involved, their God is present working toward justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the last thing in this passage this week is this admonition that teachers of the Torah, scholars of the Torah, teachers of the law who embrace the kingdom, Jesus's paradigm, his interpretation of the Torah, that they will bring out thing out of there like a store, an owner of a house who brings out of the storeroom things both new and old. And I love the mixture there. That it's not about protecting the old. It's not about the new is bad. It's not that old is good, new is bad. It's not that new is good and old is bad. It's that the decision, once again, as we've said so many times in this show, it's about what is life giving and what is death dealing. And we keep the old things um, that are life giving, and we let go. Having bumped into Jesus now, we let go of the old things that are death dealing, and we embrace the new things that are life giving. And if we embrace something new, we're not afraid of things that are new. When we discover that something we've embraced is new, might not be as life giving as we thought, then we can let that give way to something that's more life giving.
Yeah, I there's there is always a temptation, and depending on our personality type, there is something very attractive about saying, I'm just going to hold on to the Bible. The Bible that I'm going to say, this Bible is this book of absolute truth, and nothing else can come close to to measuring up to the same level of truth as the Bible. And I'm going to hold on to the Bible, and I'm make the Bible make as much sense as possible to me, and that's all it's going to be. Um, and then you're missing out on all the continued revelations that God continues to bring through the Spirit, through the natural world, through science, through reason, that has so much to give, because we're so afraid of
Anything that's new.
anything that's new, that we just got to hold on to a magic book. And then there's the other side, that there's sometimes where some of us may just want to say, I'm sick of the Bible and all its problematic passages. Just throw the whole thing out. I just, screw it. Don't need to deal with it. And I'm just going to live in the new. And that's not, I don't want to say it's dangerous. What I want to say is, there's neglecting of great wealth and wisdom that are within the pages of the Bible. It doesn't mean that everything in the Bible is life-giving. It's not. There are death-dealing passages throughout the scriptures, but there is deep, deep wisdom that also exists. And so to hold on and let that deep wisdom speak from the past is so important, because there are timeless truths that continue to run through the human story throughout all time. Not everything is timeless. Many things are temporary and for a specific time and place, but there are timeless principles that come through any great wisdom literature that we should hold on to as we're embracing the new. And the old informs the new, and the new informs the old.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we find out new things, we shouldn't be threatened by realizing that, well, we might have been wrong about something in the past. That's okay. We
Yeah.
can do better now. We're always growing, we're always doing better. And again, I love that the label of whether something is new or old, using that as your litmus, that's a false criteria to use that as the litmus test. The issue isn't whether something's new or old. The issue is whether it's life-giving or death-dealing, regardless of whether it's new or old. And that's why people that follow the life-giving teachings of Jesus and the wisdom in the Jesus story, they themselves will be a mixture of both the old and the new. They'll have both, because again, they're just looking for the most life-giving way to be a human. How can I be a source of healing and life and light and all of that?
Yeah. That's worth finding wherever you can. That's worth digging and researching all over the place to find anything that contributes to the life-giving work of God.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have permission as a Jesus follower to have your Jesus following be a mixture of some old stuff that you think is still beautiful that you don't want to let go of, and some new stuff that has become life-giving to you. That's okay. That's part of the journey.
And new old stuff. I mean, sometimes when we limit ourselves to just the old stuff of the Judeo-Christian tradition, we miss the opportunity to gain insight from other ancient texts and ancient stories that
I love that.
and
Yeah.
ancient faith traditions that also can speak into how to live life and to give life today.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. All right, man. Well, that's all I've got this week. Todd, you got anything else to add here at the
I
close?
don't. But
I'm
good
looking through
stuff.
my notes. I think that's all I got.
I love this passage. This was good stuff.
Yeah,
So,
this week was pleasant. This
yes.
week, except for that net imagery, this week is beautiful. I love these parables.
Yep. It's good stuff. So Herb, where
All
can we
right, where
find
can
you?
we find you, Todd?
I'm on Todd Leonard, toddjleonard.com and glendalecitychurch.org.
And you can find me at renewedheartministries.com and everywhere that rabbit hole will take you.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you soon.
All right, thanks for watching. Have a good week.